Right, ladies and gentlemen, let's get down to business. Our first panel for the day is on public policy entitled Strategic Outlook on Malaysia, Key Challenges and Opportunities for an Equitable Future. So it's my pleasure to introduce the co-moderators for this session, Mr. Akil Yunus and Ms. Nauwar Shukri. Akil is a 2017-2018 Chevener and is the Vice President of CAM. He's currently serving in the Southeast Asia Regional Center for Counterterrorism under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as Assistant Secretary. Whereas Nauwar is a 2018-2019 Chevener and our talented CAM Masscom Manager. She's the one behind the sleek CAM posters that, as well as all the CAM related social media postings that you would have come across. Akil and Nauwar, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Shamilah and Myelone, our two very dynamic and very capable MCs for introducing the panel. Welcome everyone once again to CAM Summit 2021. So we're going to kick off the first panel session this morning, and like Shamilah mentioned, it is a panel session that will look at Malaysia's outlook in the post-pandemic era. And for that, we have three very, very interesting speakers with us today, and I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce them. First of all, we have Professor Dr. Jomo Kwame Sundaram. Prof. Jomo is a visiting senior fellow at Khazanah Research Institute and visiting fellow at the Initiative for Policy Dialogue, Columbia University. He was an economics professor until 2004, and from 2004 to 2015, he was Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development in the United Nations System. Prof. Jomo has authored and edited over 100 books and translated 10 volumes, besides writing many academic papers and articles for the media. He now also writes regularly on sustainable development. Prof. Jomo received the Vasily Leontief Prize for advancing the frontiers of economic thought in 2007. Prof. Jomo, thank you very much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Prof. Next, we have Mr. Firdaos Rosli. Firdaos is from the Malaysian Rating Corporation Berhad, which he joined in November 2020, and comes with over 16 years of experience in public policy and economic development. As MARC's Chief Economist and Head of Economic Research, he is responsible for economic, sovereign, and sub-sovereign ratings, as well as fixed income macroeconomic research output. Prior to joining MARC, Firdaos served with the Institute of Strategic and International Studies, or ISIS, Malaysia, from January 2011 to October 2020. During his time with ISIS, he also served as a short-term external consultant to the World Bank and was a former EXCO member of the Malaysia-Japan Economic Association. Firdaos is a 2019-2020 Chevening Scholar and completed his Master of Public Policy from the London School of Economics and Political Science. He also has a degree in Accounting and Finance from Lancaster University, United Kingdom. Firdaos also holds a diploma in Public Administration from the National Institute of Public Administration, or INTAN for short. Thank you, Firdaos, for being with us today. And last but not least, we have Ms. Ginie Lim. Ginie is a Malaysian politician from the People's Justice Party, or PKR, and a former member of the Malacca State Legislative Assembly for Machap Jaya from 2018 to 2021. During that period, Ginie was also a co-member in the Malacca State Government. And prior to that, she was Deputy Director of Strategic Communications within the Selangor Menteri Besar's office. At the party level, Ginie is a member of PKR Women's Central Leadership Council and also the Alo Gajah Branch Chief. Ginie was a Chevening Scholar in 2010-2011, where she studied an MA in Poverty and Development at the University of Sussex. She also holds a Bachelor's in Mass Communication from University Science Malaysia. Thank you very much, Ginie, and once again, to all of our speakers, panelists for being with us today. I'm now going to hand over to my co-moderator, Ms. Nauwar, to kick off the round of moderated questions. Nauwar, over to you.
Thanks, Akil. Thank you all for being here. I'm very, very excited to start our first all-achievement panel for the day. So just to set the stage, the first half of our panel will be Akil and myself asking our panelists questions, but we want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you have thoughts, comments, or questions for our panelists, please share them in the chat box and we'll get to them in the second half of this session. So without further ado, I'd like to start with an open question to everyone here, in line with our theme of Bangkit Semula. We'd like to ask, if you were Prime Minister of Malaysia with a 2/3 majority, what's the one policy you would implement to help us recover from the pandemic? Perhaps we can start with Ginie and then hear from Firdaos and Prof. Jomo if you would end this first question.
Hello. Hi, thank you, Nauwar. Hi, everybody, Prof. Jomo and Firdaos and everyone's with us this morning. Thank you for inviting me. So the questions was, if you're a Prime Minister with 2/3 majority, I think if I'm a Prime Minister with 2/3 majority, I probably wouldn't do anything, because if you are a 2/3 majority Prime Minister, you almost have everything in your hands right now. But if I'm the Prime Minister with no 2/3 majority, perhaps I would push for more institutional reform, because without 2/3 majority, you wouldn't know when you're going to become the opposition, or those who are in the government will become, it could change anytime. So it would be logical for a government without 2/3 majority to carry out the reform, because you wouldn't know when will be the change of the government, because people are switching their supports from time to time. But having said so, what is more important and pressing, if there's going to be a reform to be in place, is I think we need to restore the democratic space through freedom of speech and associations, and that is the one of the things that we in government under Pakatan Harapan would like to do, but we were not able to do as much as we would like to. So, for example, like the amendment of the Article 10, the freedom of speech, assembly, and association, where we still have the clause that would allow the law to be imposed on restricting the interests of the security, where you can pass laws prohibiting anything that questioning matters, rights, status, and positions or privilege, or anything that actually is contradicting the Article 10 itself. So I think it is time to relook into this, so that we will allow space, whether from the public or from the civil society, to voice out, especially in the time of pandemic. Why is it important? Because we need to hear from the grounds what are the problems on the grounds. I mean, whether it's through the conventional media or from the social media. So if we have this kind of restrictions and people are feared to come out to voice out or take actions. I mean, for example, like myself, I was a state assembly person for Machap before this, and just right before the dissolution of the state assembly, I was giving face masks to public in the night market, and I was called by the police, to questions what I was doing, whether it's rightful or not. So this kind of thing is it's not helpful in the recovery of the pandemic. We should encourage people to help each other, and also allow the space to debate and to discuss issues that close to people's heart. And the fact that the parliament has been suspended due to the emergency is also one of the thing that is against the democratic process, because that is where we lawmaker, or elected rep play a role to check and balance the government. So I think the spirit of the constitution should be upheld, and but of course the clause that it's against the spirit itself, it has to be relooked into, because we know there are a lot of amendments been done onto the constitution for the past 30 years by, of course, the then Prime Minister, which was our Prime Minister for the past 22 months. That is something that we have to admit. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Ginie, for your thoughts. Firdaos, would you like to share?
Microphone.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Firdaus, we can't hear you, unfortunately. That's okay. It wouldn't be a virtual conference without some technical difficulty. If it's all right. No. If it's okay, Firdaus, perhaps you can go to Prof. Jomo and then we'll come back to you.
I hope Firdaus sorts out these problems. Thank you very much to the Chevening alumni for inviting me. Frankly, I'm disappointed with Ginie's response. I mean, you make promises. That's how you get your 2/3 majority, and then you don't do anything. I mean, the whole point really of political contestation is to keep your promises. And this was the problem with Pakatan Harapan. Pakatan Harapan came in and did not implement some of the elements in its manifesto. In fact, most of the elements in this manifesto. And you cannot have a population and electorate and expect to get re-elected when you have a situation like that, where politicians do not feel accountable to their electorate. And I think this is not something which is acceptable in this country. Now, I think the fact of the matter is that we have very, very serious problems in this country, like it or not, beyond the pandemic. And we need to think about what needs to be done to address those things. And many of the answers are not simple answers. And this is why I think if we look back at half a century to some of the things which, say, the late Tun Razak was struggling with, okay, which almost nobody else bothered to deal with. I think he and the late Tun Dr. Ismail and perhaps Tun Hussein did address some of these issues, and perhaps some other politicians as well. But it was basically trying to change the country. And if you think about the reforms which were introduced in 1971, they were a response to May 69. But what is May 69 doesn't come out of the blues. It came out of a particular set of developments preceding that. The elimination of the opposition to some extent, the arrest of, for example, of all the leaders of the major opposition parties from the Socialist Front, Ishaq Haji Muhammad, Bustamam, the former Alliance Minister, UMNO Minister, Aziz Ishaq, and also Burhanuddin, Dr. Burhanuddin from PAS. So you had the elimination of, for want of a better term, a contestation of ideas, contestation of ideologies. And you had instead, in that vacuum, ethnopopulism. And what I call ethnopopulism, you can call it anything you like, communalism, identity politics, you take your pick, and that has plagued the country ever since, okay? Now, Tun Razak tried to address it in his own way, expanding the basis of the Alliance Coalition, created the Barisan Nasional. But more importantly, he brought about a number of reforms. The whole point of the NEP, if you read his speech, for example, to Parliament, was basically to create the conditions for national unity. Now, that unfortunately has failed. Whether it was the NEP which failed or everything else which caused that not to happen is an important problem. One of the problems of his view of national unity was basically an interethnic reconciliation. He did not think enough about the problems of Sabah and Sarawak, for example. So obviously, there's much more needs to be done. To some extent, and very importantly, in 1971, he called for a Bangsa Malaysia. And this was echoed 2 decades later by Tun Mahathir when he called for Wawasan 2020, and he made a number of things. Now, these 2 attempts, I think, were quite important. Of course, Tun Mahathir had a very different view of how the economy should be organized. Tun Razak talked about what he called nationalist socialism, okay? And basically an important role for government both in terms of ownership of the economy and also in terms of having a developmental state. These are the kinds of challenges which we have. If you listen to Dr. Nazir Razak, for example, he thinks that the key to it was having a national consultative council. Whatever the factors are, we need to understand our history, and we need to recognize that the situation today, half a century later, has changed not only in the world, but also at the national level in order to move forward. Now, I worked abroad for almost a dozen years, and I don't, many of you have very, very different aspirations. The other day, I was listening to an ideas webinar where somebody from the floor, one of the panelists said that, all this talk about nation building is irrelevant for the younger generation. Is that true, or she's speaking for herself, or is that really true? And the main speaker said, we have a state without a nation, in the current state of affairs. So I think we need to address many of these issues and create the conditions to create a better Malaysia. And this, I think, a sense of national purpose and so on is important. And what comes from below is also very important. It was pointed out, for example, that Malaysia Boleh was not something created by the authorities. It was something which spontaneously came from things like the Sports Council and whatnot. And likewise with the Bendera Putih and the voluntarism which we have seen in the last couple of years. All that is heartening to some extent. But what does it mean going forward? What does it mean to have an all-of-government approach? What does it mean to have a whole-of-society approach? Is Keluarga Malaysia just the latest slogan of another prime minister coming up with new slogans? Because we have this sense of that every prime minister must have their own slogan, or is it something? Does it promise something more? These are the questions which we need to develop, to discuss, and we need to create the conditions to deal with rampant corruption. How do we address political financing, for example, and a whole range of other issues? So I think there's much to be done, and I'm hoping very much that the Chevening alumni, among others, will play a role in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Jomo, for your very thought-provoking insights as usual. Firdaos, would you like to add to the conversation?
Hello, hi. Can you hear me? Okay, good, thanks. Okay. Here's the thing. I'm afraid I have to agree with Ginie. See, the thing is about Malaysia is that the stronger the current government is, the weaker public policy gets over time. We have seen this in the past, especially in the recent past, where the last time we had a super strong majority was during Pak Las era, and nothing much happened then. And then when that sort of eroded, when Najib took over, following the global financial crisis, things started to take shape, where he tried to put things into perspective, where there were things that we were supposed to, there were reforms that were supposed to be initiated, right after the Asian financial crisis, or perhaps even before that, especially when it comes to the GST, were not done. So everything had to come into one small package, and it had to be done there and then. But that was not the time when we had the strongest government. So I really agree with what Ginie said. My second point is this. If I were the prime minister of the day with two-thirds majority, I would ask myself, which party do I represent? If I were to be representing UMNO, then I would do probably a lot of things. But at the same time, maybe not so much, because the pressure that I get internally as well. But if I were to be the prime minister of another party that is not UMNO, but within Barisan Nasional, it will probably be worse as well. It will probably be worse than me being, a PM coming from UMNO. But if I were to be a PM, not UMNO, not from the UMNO, the BN coalition, things will probably get worse. Sorry, Ginie, I just have to say. See, the thing is that that's just who and what we are. We are not. We as a nation have very great personalities. We have very great people, great individuals. Look at Zaim, for example. He can do many things that I can, in a week. So, but when we put 10 Zaims together, or we just don't know what to do with it. The dynamics of group is not there from our perspective. Why do I say this? Yeah. So think about it from the economic perspective. Like we started to properly shape our own economy after 1971 NEP. And as a result of that, we transitioned from agricultural to industrial, blah 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 blah. But if you look at it from a global perspective, through country comparison, our GDP per worker has not moved that much. If you look at it from the global perspective. So notwithstanding, we had annual budgets, the RMKs, the plans, the long-term plans, the wawasan, the whatever, they just don't work. And that bugs me a lot, because I just don't know where to put things into perspective, in a sense that every time when we are faced with a crisis, things tend to get worse rather than to get better. And the only crisis that we actually got better was in the 80s, after the commodity crisis. And that was not because of our doing. It was because, somebody was badly bruised by the Plaza Accord, and then they just needed help. And then we said, okay, come. That's it. It was not our initiative. We did not call Japan and say, can you come now and invest in our country? We just did not do that. So going back to your question, I would answer this. If I were the Prime Minister of the day with two-thirds majority, the very first thing that I'll do is to make sure that our 5-year development plan matches with our political cycle. The only time when we had these two combined or aligned was during the RMK 5 and RMK 6. And that was the only time in our recorded history that we grew the fastest at 8.2% annually. That was the only time. So I would probably do that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Firdaos, for your answer. Prof. Jomo talks about recognizing our history and understanding the institutions within which we work, right? And so I wonder, in coming out of this pandemic, and developing new norms or new sets of new definitions for what is normal, how do we tackle these bigger reform issues you're talking about, while also addressing the immediate needs of Malaysians, right, whose livelihoods were by the last 2 years? How and shift the system, but also help those who need it now? Perhaps if it's okay, and then Prof. Jomo. Firdaos, could you hear me?
Sorry. I think the line wasn't that good just now. Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. The question is, how do we balance the types of institutional reforms that we'd like coming out of this pandemic of Malaysians on the ground?
Institutional reforms. You see, the thing is, you either do two things. You either do one, which is to push for institutional reforms and neglect all democratic process that comes with it, like discussions and the debate, etc. And do what you have to do as a leader of the country, because that is your obligation, to ensure that everyone is, being the well-being of the people comes first before everything else. So sometimes you just have to go against the quote-unquote norms and just get things done. Or secondly, you might want to do the democratic way where you push for debates, discuss, and views and proposals from the public, etc., etc. And then when it comes to your table, the final product that comes to the table, as a minister, you probably turn to your right, to your KSU, and say, "What do I do now?" And the old Thai KSUs will go like, "Minister, if you were to do this, these are the consequences, blah 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 blah. But we can gain this. But the current age of KSUs go like, I don't know, you choose, I'll just do it. So and then if as a minister, you probably go like, am I doing things right or am I not? Because he's not saying much. That kind of feeling. So that's the kind of vibe that I get from the government right now. So when it comes to institutional reforms, it's really easy for us to say it, but when it comes to the operational bits of it, things just get lost in translation, and then it's either not done or it gets the real effect gets muted along the way.
Prof. Jomo, would you like to add to that?
Sorry.
Counter it?
No, Firdaus and I know each other for a long time. We're old friends. There's no reason to counter him. I mean, he has a view of which, in fact, his potted history, economic history of Malaysia doesn't stand up to much critical scrutiny. I mean, he's absolutely correct that governments with very thin majorities have been forced to do better. But that in itself, as we have seen in the last few years, has not been any guarantee, because what has happened, what is different now from half a century ago, is that you now have a system of political clientelism, which also involves clientelism. And this, I think, has been hugely problematic. And something we need to deal with. We cannot understand ECRL, we cannot understand MDB, we cannot understand many other problems without understanding some of those issues. So, and what we have is policy making which kicks the can down the road. Okay, instead of dealing with very difficult issues such as a fiscal crisis and so on, what do? You take from the younger generation, from Kwame, a fund which was supposedly dedicated to the future generation to compensate for the loss of revenue from oil and gas, and you basically use that money. You basically, that contract, intergenerational contract, has been undermined. Then you basically allow people to take the money from EPF, which obviously people desperately needed resources. But basically, we now have, according to the Chief Strategic Officer of EPF, a situation where only 3%, down from 18%. Previously, 18% had enough in the EPF accounts to cover them, to be above the poverty line after retirement. Now it's down to 3%. We also know that even before the pandemic, about 70% of the population, were not capable of saving very much. We often measure and claim that we have among the highest savings rates, the highest rates, excuse me, highest rate of financial inclusion in the world. Okay, we have 80+%. But what does it mean? It means that most Malaysians are in debt. Before my generation, that means for young people in the 1960s who were joining government service, you could expect to buy a house, a modest house, and pay off the housing loan in about a decade. Okay, now the financial sector is talking about intergenerational loans, and the second largest borrower of the Malaysian government, because a lot of Malaysian government borrowing is off the books, right? Because it is done through GLCs and so on, rather than through the budgetary process. So it doesn't even go to Parliament, right? You have all these government guaranteed loans. Now, if you look at what is happening, you basically see that the single biggest thing is Dana Infra, and Infra very often the contracts go, on basis which are dubious to say the least. Okay, and then you have this situation with the second largest borrower is PTPTN. Okay, and which is fraught with problems. Okay, and which do not seem to be no government wants to resolve them because it is considered to be a political minefield. So we just keep kicking the can down the road, borrowing here, borrowing there, but keeping them off the books and so on and so forth. So we really need the institutional reforms. Unfortunately, very few people even talk about it because it's, you don't score many political points from thinking about these issues and talking about these issues. So I do share Firdaus's view that many of these things are not going to be solved by the mob, by the crowds. Okay, you need to have serious consideration of difficult policy issues. And he's absolutely correct that the Pakla regime didn't do very much, but it's not for want of trying. Okay, let's not forget that during that period, Pakla tried to rectify what he thought to be a neglect of agriculture. I think the policies which were introduced were misguided, but that's with the benefit of hindsight, right? But I wasn't even in the country in those days, but he did try to do some things. He did try to do a number of other things in terms of redistribution, which has been pointed out. He did try to support much more SMEs compared with the lip service which we have had for many decades now. So it's not as if he didn't try, but they were, maybe he was poorly advised. I don't know. Firdaus was in government. I was never in government, and so he has insights which and he's also absolutely right about the changing relationship between the politicians and the civil servants. Having been a civil servant himself, he knows what he's talking about. But I do think we need to get to the roots of why we have this kind of, I don't like to use the word malaise, M-A-L-A-I-S-E, but you know what I'm talking about, right? So we have a situation which needs rectification, and that's why although there are many problems with Dr. Nazir's proposal, there's something to be said for it. Following from what Firdaus has observed, that there is a need to have a discussion at a different level, not subject to the political pressures which now seems to dominate parliamentary politics. It's a bit fast to move on. But I think to directly answer your question now, Nauwar, the key problem is that we have successive governments basically kicking the can down the road. Okay, and this unfortunately is basically passing the buck. We know now. I mean, you look at the ECRL loan, right? First 7 years you don't even actually pay anything, but the interest is accumulating, but you don't pay anything. These are the kinds of deals which our government leaders have negotiated, and you pay a price for it. It's not just that the interest is accumulating. For not paying anything during the first 7 years, you are basically paying a premium for it. I mean, Firdaus knows this very well. I mean, he's in the financial sector. He knows that nothing comes for free. So we need to really address some of these problems, and I think so that's why groups like this, like for getting people to start thinking about some of these, not the daily mundane things about what's going to happen in Malacca, or I'm not quite sure. I'm a little out of touch, because I've kept myself quite physically isolated for about 5 months now. I have no idea what the latest buzz is about, okay, after Malacca. Okay, maybe it's about when the next elections are going to be, And it takes courage for somebody like Khairi to come out and say, it's dangerous to have an election right now because the pressure is on, from certain quarters to have an early election. Let me stop there.
Okay. Can I respond?
Yes, Ginie. And we are running a little short of time. We would like to open questions to the floor. So if I can just move to the next question, and I will get you to go first, Ginie, because it ties in very much to what everyone has been talking about in terms of political stability and how that can affect some of the how we push through with reforms and how quickly we can recover from a problem like a global pandemic. So if I can get the question that I have for the panelists next is, how does Malaysia's political stability or instability affect its ability to recover swiftly? And I think this ties into a question that we had from the floor as well, in terms of how we can push through reforms when, at the governmental level, things are so uncertain. So Ginie, if you can go first, and maybe we can get Jomo and Firdaos to just chime in with a short answer of your own.
Okay, thank you, Akil. A very quick, short response to what I've said earlier, and probably Firdaos got what I'm trying to say. Actually, what I'm saying is the people, the rakyat, get the most when the government is weak. So if the government has a 2/3 majority, it can either do the best or the worst. So that is the most terrifying thing. But when we were in government as Pakatan Harapan, of course, today we have to be very honest. When we were in government, we didn't do much as what we have promised. And I share the disappointment that Prof. Jomo expressed just now, because I'm part of it. And there is no excuse that we are not pushing reforms when we were in government, even though we don't have the majority. Because what I was trying to say just now was, anytime we could be toppled, or we could be, there could be a change of government, and any institutional reform, it's good because one day if you're in the opposition, you still have, the democratic space and the reform is done. So you secured the, the institutional, what do you call it's good because the democratic space is secure if you have done the reform, but we didn't do it when we were in government. So if we didn't do it, is it because we were not confident, or is there other reason to it? So if we were confident that we do it, it's good for everyone, even though we will become the opposition one day, and it will be good for now. But if we didn't do it, if we were in government with a 2/3 majority, probably we wouldn't do anything, probably we would do worse, because we are not confident with ourselves that we should open up the space for, for oppositions or for civil societies to come in. A very simple example of, as I said, Article 10, which is the freedom of association, peaceful assembly, and all this. We didn't get rid of the clause that is against the spirit itself. So I would stop on that, and I will move on to the issues of whether we need stability, we need a strong leadership, or I would call a dictatorship to pull us out of this pandemic. As Firdaos said, I think it's a dilemma that we all have to be honest about it. The case of Malacca is a very classic example. I experienced it myself, as in last year, we lost the state government because of the Sheraton move, and we thought people were angry. Okay, we thought it's a rightful thing to call it, we want to get back the mandate from the people this time for the state election. So we went around to campaign and said we want to get back the mandate. But at the end, we didn't get it. Why? Because people are more concerned of their own livelihood. They're concerned of their well-being, they're concerned of the economic survival, which is very, very normal for people. But what have we compromised? What have we compromised? Okay, so I think it's quite a, something that we in the opposition has to think about it. We have compromised, the parliament being suspended, we probably have to be compromising that the elections, and we have to compromise for signing MOU at the higher level. Maybe to a lot of people in the city, they might think that signing an MOU is a good thing because it saw like promise some kind of stability and peace deal between both parties. But on the ground, people are not happy because there's no space they can voice out. In the rural setting, there are still a lot of suppression of voice, especially, UMNO and Bersatu and PKR in the rural area. We still have a lot of issues that we can't solve because you can't voice out. For example, when I was still a state assembly for Machap, we didn't have a state assembly sitting for almost a year until September. It's 9 months, more than 9 months, because we had our last in November. So we didn't have a sitting, the state assembly sitting for 9 months. But when we had it, I had the opportunity to voice out. One of the issues that concerning the majority, the people who are receiving the assistance from the welfare department, Jabatan Kebajikan Masyarakat. One of the issues they are facing is, the welfare department has to review on a yearly basis the recipients, whether they are still eligible, to receive the assistance. If only the recipient apply for it. So let's say if you are receiving the assistance now, and after a year you have to reapply, so you can be reviewed whether you are eligible to continue the assistance. But during the pandemic, during the MCO period, a lot of these recipients have, first most of them are immobile. Probably their children are around. They couldn't go to the welfare department to reapply, or even if they go to the welfare department, it's not open. But their assistance was stopped just because they didn't reapply, and they didn't get to continue their assistance, the bantuan kebajikan. So when they came to me, what I could do is I write to the welfare department, I call them. But if we have, the state assembly sitting maybe at the state level, same goes to the parliament level, and a lot of things can be voiced out. So I think we have to think about this. If we compromise on the pillars of democracy, which is the state assembly or the parliament sitting and all this, then we will have problem like really addressing the real issues. What are the real issues? I think Prof rightly pointed out. The issues is the underbanked and the unbanked. Well, we have this problem even before this pandemic, but this problem becomes even more serious and it surfaced during this pandemic. But what are we tackling? Okay, we give bantuan makanan, we give bako makanan, we have this I-Lestari, I-Sina, I-Citra, all this kind of moratorium. And of course, you have the special grant for the Prihatin, 3,000 ringgit one-off to the small businesses. But does it solve the long-term issues of those who are underbanked or unbanked? And if this is the core issues, what are the social protections or financial inclusion strategy that has to be in place even after the pandemic? Of course, now we can solve the immediate problem facing the people. Well, when people came to me last year, I think in March and April, where we lost the government, I was in opposition. People came, of course, we have to help them to apply the EPF, to withdraw their EPF. And it is so sad. I don't want to encourage them to withdraw, but they have no choice. They have to withdraw. And probably they only withdraw 2 times, because one time you can withdraw only 500 ringgit, and they don't even have more than 1,000 ringgit in their EPF for the account, the second account, I think. So they probably only get to withdraw 2 times, and that's it. So what happened to them after that? So I think, this pandemic, whole thing let us, we have to be honest and face the reality that, do we really want to put our hope on just one person or one regime? Like what Firdaos said, he just do what he thinks is right for the people, he do it, or we need to install and make sure that certain mechanism is in place for us to check and balance, to voice up, as I said, institutional reform in ensuring, the the judiciary's independence. The election commission is it's back to its rightful role to make sure the election process is fair and justice. I mean, like in Malacca election, we can't even have a public rally. We can't even, people, even the campaigners are so fearful, even wearing a badge. So yeah, that's all I would like to share.
Thank you, Ginie. Yeah, sorry I had to.
Sorry, no problem.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Firdaos, maybe I can give you 30 seconds, 1 minute to respond to that question, and then I think we'll go straight to the Q&A from the floor. So yeah, you have 1 minute.
See, the thing is, Akil, if you see the kind of numbers that I see on daily basis, it's super scary. Okay, it's not funny anymore. At first when I joined Mark, I thought, okay, yeah, this is. But after one point, it's not getting funny. See, the thing is, okay, let me just put things into perspective. Last month, the number of MGS, Malaysian government securities, the number of debt that the government issued was the highest ever recorded in history. Did you guys know that? Never. It was 17 billion in 1 month, and we expect we expect that for this year alone, it will probably go up to about 160 to 170 billion worth of debt. To put things into perspective again, the debt service charges, just this debt service, not principal, the debt service charges alone for this year and perhaps even next year would be more than double than what it was 8 years ago. These are just some numbers that I can share with you because these, you can Google them, but you got to do what it takes right now. Remember in 1997 when we had our Asian financial crisis, what Mahathir did was just to push all files off his table and then take the red ones right on top and then get that one done right now. But in today's government, we go like, it's okay, let's do another study. And ESC do another study, I mean, like, why? You need action. Do that. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Firdaus. I think you really hit the nail on the head. Action is always more important than talk. And I think with that, it kind of flows in very nicely to the end of the moderated discussion. But now we're going to take questions from the floor. And we have a couple of questions that have come in already. And if it's okay, I'm going to just read out the first one. We have a question from Isaiah for the panel, and maybe we can get Prof. Jomo to go first on this one. What is your take on the current contract doctor issues that has been quite a big issue in Malaysia, and it's been played ongoing for some time? What do you see as a proper resolution to this problem? Because obviously the longer it takes to resolve it, doctors are obviously quitting the civil service or moving away, and this is leading to a greater brain drain in Malaysia. So perhaps we can get Prof. Jomo to respond to that.
Thank you very much. I think we have a very complex issue with the contract doctor issue. Malaysia is generating so many medical graduates, and it's very, very difficult to absorb them within the government service. Having said that, I think it is very disappointing that the government health medical services have not increased significantly. The fact of the matter is that government doctors are very much stressed, and this even pre-pandemic. And I think it's very important to that's why I was very disappointed that Pakatan Harapan did not keep its promise to increase funding for the health sector. All the evidence internationally is very, very strong that government-funded health financing produces better results. Adam Wagstaff from the World Bank, the late Adam Wagstaff, he actually showed this in a series of papers that is far more efficient than not only than private health insurance as you find in the US, but also than what is called social health insurance. Because social health insurance actually does not really cover everybody, and this I think is a very, very important thing. So if we are serious, because Malaysia is a signatory to the commitment to have universal health care, or previously the slogan used to be healthcare for all. We have to do something about this, but and this includes increasing the number of health service personnel, contract doctors included, but also nurses and others. Because, you know, let's face it, the frontline workers are not just doctors. As much as I respect the doctors for all they're doing, there's a lot of auxiliary staff, and we have seen how many countries have innovated tremendously, you know, to think very, very innovatively about how you can use paramedical staff, nurses and very highly trained nurses. In India, for example, the cheapest hospital for surgery with a very, very good track record for success basically uses very highly trained nurses to do many of the tasks which are currently done by doctors in open heart surgery. You know, there's all this innovation which is going on in the world, and we have to keep up with that. But the problem, as far as contract doctors is concerned, it's part of a larger problem of not expanding the health services sufficiently. I mean, Malaysia has to be commended. Spent, you know, quite a bit on social services, but most of that spending is actually for education, and we do not get very good results from education spending, unfortunately, for a whole host of reasons which we don't get into right now. You know, but if you contrast that with health, we actually did very, very well in the early years. Much of the increase in life expectancy is mainly because of improvements in health in healthcare services, but it came from very simple innovations such as the Bidan Kampung. You know, I mean, I'm you know, in Bidan Kampung was only introduced in the 1960s. You know, and this was a very, very important innovation. But today, how many children are born in the kampung? You know, so you need to think very much about urban poverty and you know, the needs of urban communities and so on. And we have this problem where, you know, almost 1/3 of the Malaysian labor force comprises foreign workers, of whom 2/3 are undocumented. Denial about it. We pretend they don't exist. So all our national statistics are, you know, are distorted by the fact that we don't even include them in many of our numbers. But the final point I think we need to address is the whole question of which Firdaos raised in his last comment, which is a very, very important comment, that we have governments, successive governments, not wanting to tax. So you have a huge gap, you know, and World Bank report after World Bank report points out the obvious, you know, that very much below the tax thing. But you know, to have a healthcare service, to have anything, you know, you need to have much better taxation. And the best time to introduce taxation is right now, because you do not have much resistance, because the taxes are not going to bite very much right now, right? You know, they only bite when things improve. So this is the time to introduce, you know, and I was hoping very much that since you have a non-politician, non-MP as the finance minister, that we would have seen that, but perhaps other members of the cabinet prevailed over him, and we did not see the innovation which is needed. So tough choices, and I'm very appreciative of Firdaos for reminding us, you know, about how, you know, that even despite suppressing the problem of indebtedness by kicking it to the the so-called government guaranteed debt, we still have this huge problem with government debt. Let me stop.
Thank you, Prof. Jomo. We have a question from Adriana. Adriana, if you want to unmute, introduce yourself very briefly, and if it's possible, keep your question quite brief. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Right. Good morning. My name is Adriana. I'm a Chevening scholar, 2005-2006. I'm a lawyer by background. So my question is, probably there's no answer, but I just want to know, is there any hope for us? I think I was very euphoric in 2018. You know, since 2008. When 2018 happened, I thought it was a pipe dream come true, at least for 5 years. But then it got derailed. So going forward, I think we all know what we need to do going forward individually and in the communities that we serve. But is there any hope, seeing as how we are right now, hodgepodge of headless chickens, I would say. Thank you.
Who would like to start with that question? If it's okay, maybe Firdaos, you can start. Is there hope for us?
Stop looking at me now.
I actually wanted to ask Prof. Jomo, but
okay.
I guess Firdaos is the only hope we have here.
No. Here, okay. Let me just be fair. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel that I'm looking at, it gets longer and longer each time. It's not that the light is getting dimmer. It's just that the tunnel gets longer. So here's the thing. Prof. Jomo is right. We keep on kicking the can down the road and expect the subsequent leadership and next generations to pick up the tab. That just don't work. You see, the thing is, okay, let's just look at a very simple basic economic theory. If you raise debt today, what you are effectively doing is to take future prosperity to this very day. The problem is this: if you invest in if you take future prosperity and then invest in something that will create the kind of multiplier effects that you would require, even though it's 1.1, it will still generate multiplier effect. But the thing is, we borrow from tomorrow for today to spend today, and then that's it. Because unemployment, it's at record high. It has been notoriously high since May last year? The thing is, even if our unemployment rate were to go down, it is solely because of government intervention and not because of the private sector. That is the problem. So when that happens, at a time when prices go up a little bit, everyone jump out the seat and then go, no, this cannot be. But then the thing is, if you think about it from the private sector perspective, you don't allow me to operate at 100% capacity. I'm operating at 60, for example. That 40% must come from somewhere, and it has to come in the form of rising prices. Because I've got salaries to pay, I've got shareholders to think about, some companies have bondholders to think about, and even Petronas, they have shareholders, stakeholders, and bondholders to think about, and stakeholders. Things are not as easy as it seems. So to answer your question directly, the only way we can get this through, like #Bangkit Semula, is to get someone who is not afraid to die for the country. Well, not literally, but you get what I mean.
Okay, can I add on what the Firdaos has just shared? Nauwar?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, okay. I think, the real issues on the ground is people are struggling and trying to survive. And I think what more concerns me is, the well-being of the children and also the women, especially children, learning away from school at home, where you have only one handphone and shared by 4 or 5 siblings. So these are the real issues that we might have generations that, probably will be lagging behind and need to catch up, and a lot of side effect throughout the learning process. So this is one of the many social issues that facing on the ground. But what the government needs to do is they have to prioritize. They have to pull the fundings, allocations for all this, improving or enhancing the social safety net, for those who are deserving, the poor, not just the M40 or B40, but also those whose voices are hardly heard, like the Orang Asli. In my area, we have seven villages of the Orang Asli community that they always come to me like, how do we make sure that our kids learn? They probably only one handphone with a very limited internet access. So the government has to put their priority right, and more importantly is cut leakages, cut the corruptions and wastage in government. Well, this is the whole thing. But the thing is, the only thing this can happen if we have a proper mechanism of check and balance. And they know ultimately at the end of the day, they have to be answerable to the people, which is through elections. So if we avoid this kind of democratic process in place, why would they be doing things for the people if they know they can have a comfortable, positions just because of the pandemic? So I think it's a, probably it's a chicken and egg issue, but I think we cannot compromise on that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ginie. And if Prof. Jomo, may I ask if you could share your thoughts, but perhaps keep it a little brief as we approach the end of our session.
Oh,
Is there hope
okay.
for us?
Well, let me try to address Adriana's question since it was meant to be for me to address. Sorry about not realizing it. I think that, I first went to university about half a century ago. Okay, so the fact that I'm still here today, talking to you, and the reason I talk to you guys is because I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic that you can make a difference, that you will do better than us, than my generation has, and that's why, when people speak up, I know Firdaus is going to be embarrassed by this, but I mean, he tells us, some of the problems which we are facing, and we might have a difference of perspective, but just speaking truth to power is very important, and so that's the minimum we can ask for, and I think that's something which is enjoined by all systems of belief, and so on. And we have also very, very interesting developments. Things change all the time. I mean, you talk about a climate crisis. We have a political climate crisis. We have a political climate crisis where the winds of change are blowing, but we don't even know which direction they're coming from. I mean, when Haji Hadi tells us yesterday that he's not exactly very happy with Muafakat Nasional, that opens up well, I don't want to use a can of worms, but it basically opens up a lot of possibilities. So Adriana, the short answer is yes, 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 and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Prof. Jomo. I think, Prof. Jomo's answer really kind of sums up this session. But if I can just quickly, since maybe we have just 1 or 2 more minutes to get some concluding remarks from both Ginie and Firdaus in terms of the way forward and what do you think, what every Malaysian, possibly the role of each individual Malaysian in terms of carrying us forward and getting us out of this, not just this pandemic, but in the long term as well. Probably we can get 30 seconds from each of you before we wrap up this session.
Let me go first, because I'm very touched by Prof. Jomo. Okay, I think we have to acknowledge that there's a vacuum. I wouldn't call it a crisis. I mean, maybe Prof. Jomo termed it that way, but I would call it that's a real vacuum because, for the first time in Malaysian history, we have seen the downfall of Barisan Nasional. So this is something that really, something that's been there that you never imagined that it will fall, but it finally falls, and now that's a vacuum of all sorts of things. And the first time you're seeing a prime minister from UMNO, but it's not the president of UMNO. So the infighting is really real. So this kind of vacuum, who should fill in the vacuum? It's us, every one of us here. We were equipped with knowledge, we were equipped with all kinds of skills, and we have to organize ourselves. And I really think CAMS is doing a great job. I mean, putting all of us together. Although I'm not that long ago, but we haven't really had the opportunity to share the views. But once we have this space to share, we feel stronger. I feel, despite all whatever happened to Pakatan Harapan, I feel, really that kind of solidarity from my fellow Chevenists. And I really thank Zaim and also now Akil and everyone for giving me this opportunity. So let's fill in the vacuum. We take charge, and the future is in our hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginie. Thank you very much. Firdaus?
Thank you, Akil. You see, economists are not really good with morality issues. See, because we are not trained to do those things. Okay, it goes back to the first chapter of microeconomics, the demand and supply. It has nothing to, there's nothing in the textbook saying that, this price is actually the right price for everyone. As long as it reaches the equilibrium, that's it. It's good. That's what the market wants. You see, so coming out from this crisis has to do, the normative aspect of it is a lot to do with what is right. What is the right thing to do right now as a country? But the thing is this, no, you just have to get out of it, right or wrong, we just have to get out of it. The fact of the matter that we focus too much on pharmaceutical intervention to get this thing through, is probably not the right thing to do. Because if you think about it, in an econometric point of view, there's a lot of things in the error term that is not being explained. And that bit is probably has a lot to do with investments. The lack of investments that we have, which requires everyone not to social distance, not to follow orders, not to follow SOPs. And we have to tackle that, not to, lock everyone up, and then, be very happy with the fact that crime rate has gone down. I mean, like, come on. If everyone is locked up in the house, obviously crime rate will go down now. I mean, you don't. So, I mean, so that's the reality. I mean, you just have to do what you got to do. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Firdaus. With that, I'd like to thank all three of our speakers, Prof. Jomo, Ginie, and Firdaus, for keeping things very real. And I think you've given us all great insights from this session. And I personally wish we could have extended this session a little bit longer, but I will now wrap up this session. I will hand over back to the MCs to take it forward. Thanks once again to all our speakers. Thank you.